Welcome to Talk with Petri Show. I'm your host Petri, and today's guest is serial entrepreneur and angel investor Micke Paqvalén. Welcome, Micke.
Thank you.
You started your entrepreneurial career at 17 years old. You have raised over 100 million in venture capital. You have several successful exits. What are the lessons you have learned? I think you call them your thesis. And let's start with your desert walk. What is a desert walk?
Yeah, desert walk is every entrepreneurship. There's something common in every company I've started, and that's that every time it takes 3 years to find a business model, to get everything nailed down, value propositions, ideal customer profiles. So I started to call it desert walk, and it's been the commonality of every company I've started at. It takes approximately 3 years to get there, but then things start to roll.
And what are the other ones? I think you had maybe 3 or 4 more.
You have to remind me now when we had this discussion.
Yeah, you were showing me those fancy slides, and you mentioned people and culture, I think, and corporate governance and flexible finance. Comes to my mind. So you want to actually just share a little bit of those as well, because I think those are, and we can then go to the stories, because I don't think you just came up one morning and wrote them down. It was more like that you were actually experiencing them. But I think giving the thesis first, and then going to actual stories, how you actually came up with them, probably gives people a little bit of idea that what happened and how the struggle actually made those two.
So the second one is corporate governance, and people tend to diminish the importance of corporate governance when setting up a company. Corporate governance is actually it's extremely important, not only for the internal company, but also externally when you're looking for funding. If you don't have your books in order, the value of the company will deteriorate over time. So corporate governance is a kind of a broader concept. It's about both having your books in order from start, but also of actually thinking proactively and engaging the right people at the right time proactively, so that you it's almost like building a house. You need to do there's certain things you need to do in sequential order, but corporate governance is definitely one that you need to start with. Then I think I mentioned about the culture and the importance of values, and I've seen it, especially when it comes to recruitments and when it comes to building teams, powerful teams, having sound values, and it's not something that you just invent. It has to come from your inside of you, and as a founder you are the one who is actually carrying those values on a daily basis. So I would say that values, corporate governance, and then the desert walk, that's some of the commonalities and some of the things that people very easily stumble on very early in when they're building a company, when they're so excited about the product that they forget all these other things that actually can make or break it for you.
Let's start with Telepo. I think that's really successful case, but there are also some dire lessons to learn as well. And let's start from the beginning from there. What is Telepo? How did you come up with the idea? And then can you sort of tell the story? And maybe I can ask some questions in the meanwhile, but let's get started with from the beginning.
So for those who don't know Telepo, we were very early on in the voice over IP business. That was end of the 1990s. I was part of a very exciting journey called HotSIP. SIP being the standard protocol for multimedia communication. Back then it was H323, and we kind of and it only supported voice communication. So we kind of set up a company called HotSIP, which was later acquired by Oracle, and the investors were the big ones like 3i and Argonor and Legend and the big guys. and they had this kind of view that that it's the service providers that's going to dominate the world. And so we for a couple of years we tried to convince them to kind of, hey, look, we have this service called SIPO service, which was actually a very nice service. You could do multiple things. You could do online video, you could do online gaming. Was actually presence was part of that, voice, video, all of that was part of that. It was like a soft client, and we tried to convince them that the future is there. And they were no. You guys, you need to build infrastructure for the big telcos, service providers. And we kind of okay. In came a guy who said, okay, you're scrapping your consumer service, right? Because we had this soft client, beautiful soft client, and we said, yeah, unfortunately. And
I remember actually, I was one of the probably the first people to also use it, and it was so fancy, what you could do with it.
It was like remember, it's more than 25 years ago, so the time flies. So we had this guy coming in and saying, okay, I can take over, and we said, okay, here are the guys who can do it for you and help you do it. And like 18 months later, he sold the company for, I think it was 4.8 billion. And it was funny to see how wrong, these big corporate venture capitalists can be. And it was actually Skype. So I remember that meeting when we met Niklas Zennström back in Stockholm. But from there on, we were convinced that the consumer side, the B2C, is where we need to go. And so I jumped off 2003. I jumped off HotZip, where I was the biggest private investor at that time. And I started to, with the acceptance of the investor, I started to look at the consumer side, and what are the consumer services we can build. And of that came Telepo, which eventually then ended up being a more than very much a B2B platform for enterprises. And today, actually, I think Telepo is the largest platform for telcos providing B2B services in Europe. We sold it to Astra, who then sold it to Mitel, and now it's part of a bigger group. But many learnings from
But it's not that simple, like any business. In the beginning, you were building it. Did you have one or two co-founders in there, and you started to have it as a cash flow positive company? And can you tell what happens when you start to invite also some VCs in?
Yeah, so what happened was we grew the company. We actually grew organically 100% every year. So by 2008, we were doing roughly 10 million ARR. I think it was 8 to be honest, and we had a order stock of 10 million. So we were really looking forward to rapid growth, going from then 10 to 20 to 40 to 100. And a year earlier, we brought on a company called, our venture capital firm called Accel Partners, and they were like, they were like saying that you need to fire this. You need to fire it. It's going really well, and you need to bring in the big corporate guys. You need to bring in a CEO, a seasoned CEO. You need to bring in a seasoned sales team and stuff like that. So what happened then was, after a year, they unfortunately they convinced me that to step down as a founder and bring in one of the guys was head of Oracle's service sales in Europe, and the other guy was head of Cisco's enterprise sales in Europe. And those two guys came on board, and unfortunately, it was 2008 when the financial crisis hit. So what happened was that we actually fourfolded our cost base, but the revenue started dropping. So we actually lost 50% revenues every year from there on. And the formula didn't work at all. So later on, a couple of years down the road, that team was gone, but the company was more or less empty and had to restart. And fortunately, we had a really good COO who took over it and actually got the company back on its feet. We did a fundraising, and then it was sold. But lesson learned there was, never ever remove the founder from the equation, because when you do that, it's so much of the company value based and soul and all those kind of things that I talked about earlier. It's not like a machine where you can just replace one thing with another. It's actually, a founder is extremely critical for a company's success. And every company I've been in and every company I've invested in, I've seen the same thing happen over and over again. So, make sure you keep the founders happy. That's one of the things I've learned the hard way. And during this journey, of course, then we were diluted down to almost zero.
And you also mentioned that they convinced you to step down, but was there also some other mechanisms what you have to be aware of? That's probably coming from the corporate governance, I would guess, the shareholder agreement and investment agreement and all these things which sound so boring, and you don't want to pay attention to those. If you're busy to build your company, that's the sentiment, at least usually. But
yeah, a couple of things. First of all, we back in early 2000 or 2006 when we brought on this, it was not only AXA, it was a couple of other VCs. We didn't really understand the value of a shareholders agreement. So for us, we had 2/3 of the company, and we were okay, with splitting the board. So basically, they got half of the board, we got half of the board. So we didn't really care much about that. We were just building a company. And they also got a decisive vote when choosing chairman. And that was actually one of the biggest mistakes we've done. Because when the going got tough, which always it gets, we were we were growing so fast that we needed continuously to increase our working capital. And 2008 financial crisis came. We needed to fill our war chest, and of course they stepped up. They're professional investors, but they did have some special terms. Since I've been objecting the changing the management or changing the CEO for a while, and we had the majority, they had this small clause embedded in that agreement where basically they had basically the right to decide when the company was supposed to change the CEO. And so they exercised that right pretty quickly after they kind of financed us. And that ended up, okay, I got a good deal, but that ended up basically destroying the company, which unfortunately today, Telepo is doing, I hear that it's Europe's largest infrastructure provider for these kind of services. So, and I know that they, for example, in Sweden, they have many millions daily users as well. So it's unfortunate, but sometimes you do these mistakes, and that was one of the mistakes.
So how would you do it differently now? If I recap here, you build it from scratch. Basically, you were cash flow positive as well, and you were doubling the revenues, and it was looking good. And then you were like, okay, let's make it a bit faster. Let's take some additional capital. But basically, then you were sidelined, and then the financial crisis hit, and those things happened. So what would you do now?
I would be
if you would be in the same situation.
Yes, sorry. I would be extremely aware with the cost base. So what we did was we built up a cost base for a extremely rapid growth. So as I said, we were looking at the growth rates from, we were doing 100% every year organically. And they wanted us to continue to do that 100%. But that means also that you have to build your cost base in order to support that and sustain that. And I would look for efficiencies there instead of just, ramping up. I think we interviewed some 500 people at that time. We were really, bringing in a lot of people, and I think that's one of the core mistakes is when the cost control got out of hands. It was like we had the cash, but when the cash started to diminish, that was when the problem started. Of course, because the growth didn't come, and we had the financial crisis, so we didn't get that growth that we were looking for short term. And that short term turned out to be a very unhealthy exercise for us.
How much funds did you actually raise? And do you remember the burn rate? Because usually what happens is that when you're actually going fast and you need to working capital and have a lot of payroll as well, you raise a lot of money, but you also lose a lot of money per month, basis if you're not that profitable or you need it for the growth as well. So things can go quickly wrong.
Yeah, we were actually, when I was running the company, we had a burn rate of approximately 500K a month, a burn rate. And we were doing revenues slightly north of that. So we were, like I said, we were cash flow positive. When we brought on the new management, suddenly the burn rate jumped from 500 to well above 1 million, but the revenues didn't jump that much. So that's where we started to really quickly burn money. And we brought in almost 10 million at that point of time in chunks, but that wasn't enough. So it was like a unfortunate situation. But make sure that you don't, like a co-founder, you're always aware, you always look for the money, look after the money in a completely different way that the venture capitalist does. And that's, we have different interests. And unfortunately, those interests didn't meet at that point of time. They were good. I mean, I can't complain. They had big hopes and they had big plans for us, and they actually brought in some really good people. But this terminal mistake of actually starting to grow the cost base was the biggest mistake we ever did, without actually making sure that we had the long-term sustainability for it. A great company.
But then you were, and still is, then you learned from these lessons, and you started something called Kiosked, and that was a few years later.
Yeah.
Can you tell what is Kiosked and explain the case, whichever way you wanna go ahead?
So I took a couple of years break. I actually got a really good deal from them. So I took a couple of years break, and I started to look around what's the next challenge I want to take. And in Finland, something called Aalto University had been just founded. So I started wandering around there and looking, okay, are there any interesting things to do? And there was a couple of couple of persons who were actually working on something called Aalto Entrepreneurship Society. And I tried to convince these investors, Axel and all these guys, that, hey, Finland is a hot place. This was like 2009. Finland is the place, there's everything, really cool things are happening in Finland. It's bubbling. And they were like, nah, it's too far away. We're not interested. Later on, they made some super good investment in Supercells and in Rovios but that was like 3 years earlier. So I started to wander around there and see and help these guys. And we went on tour to try to find, different exciting companies. One of them is today is in the music business, a very well-known brand called Musician that we found. And so it was really exciting times. It was a kind of a new generation, entrepreneurship generation growing up back then that wanted to take risk. And they've gotten rewarded very well. So Micke Paqvalén was one of those guys that, I spent a lot of time there mentoring and helping. And back then I actually met my co-founder at Kiosked. He had this idea of tagging images. I said, why not? It's a great idea, and e-commerce is just around the corner. Why not, combine e-commerce and tagging with each other and, build something that, basically what it means is that you can monetize every impulse. And it was like early 2010. Monetizing impulses wasn't interesting.
So it was like Instagram just started, YouTube was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, and was it iPhone 4S or something around that time, or was it even 4?
Yeah.
So we are talking really early years.
Yeah, but it was super exciting because we call it a web-wide shop, and basically the intent was that you could purchase anything you see. Anything you see can be yours was our kind of tagline. So basically, being able to use the phone to basically purchase anything that you see, and auto recognize it, and basically enabling it to be. But the problem was that there wasn't any solution on the e-commerce side. E-commerce was very early days. Then it was Magento, and all those guys were very, very early. So this kind of one-click purchase solutions wasn't out there. So it actually ended up for us. We had to take the customer to a store, and that single thing killed the whole business case. If we would have had back then, one-click shopping available, social commerce would be on a completely different level than it is today. But we basically made it really, contextual tagging. We almost made it 100% accurate. So we worked with all these big publishers in the UK, like Mirror, Times, all of those. They had it on their website, and we were able to do contextual tagging automatically. And so we had something which was kind of really super slick and nice. And we also did video tagging. So remember, it was 2011. But as the business model didn't fly, we didn't really make any money, because it was everything. It was all about the kind of it was all about the CTA pricing. So basically, you had to purchase in order for us to earn any money. And so we ended up pivoting the whole business in 2012 and going more into advertising. And so we used the same technology to build our own ad servers. And then further on down the road, 2015, when Google introduced header bidding and all these kind of new technologies, we went into that business as well. So we kind of we pivoted quite a few times during the way, and we did pretty well, actually. I would say we until 2015 we once again we double our revenues every year. So it was an exciting journey. We had a great team, we had a great corporate values, we had a good corporate governance, we had a great board. But then 2015, we all know that Google and Facebook decided that they want to take that market. So we were forced to kind of pivot once again.
And you also raised a little bit of money, I would say. It was angel investors, then there was some VC money, and also some other means, the European Investment Bank, and it was in 2 digits in millions what you raised altogether.
Yeah, we had a really good investors back then, and the funny thing was that we quite early on tried to kind of remember what we did wrong in Telepo, and so we started to look for different debt instruments, and I heard some rumors that European Investment Bank had been in Finland pitching that they were setting up some debt instruments, and they had been there in April 2000, I think it was 2015. And I just decided to call them up and ask them, how did it go? What's up? And I said, no interest in Finland, nowhere. I said, hey, this was in June. I said, I'm really interested. But they said, oh, we don't even have the agreements here for this. So I said, I can fix those for you guys. So we ended up of actually closing that 50 million investment round, actually together with European Investment, writing the core agreements that they are using today, together with them, and setting up this facility of 15 million. And it was a really quick exercise. We did it in less than 4 weeks. It's because it needed to be done before they went on vacation in August. So we actually signed the papers in end of July. So first contact was, I think it was midsummer. Midsummer Day,
Wow.
June, and then we closed the round in or the debt instrument in end of July. So it was a really, really, really good ride for us. And in that time, we also wrote all the agreements that for them, so that they could actually go. They had but the only thing they had was money back then, but they were really eagerly looking for promising startups. So that was really good for us.
And when you got the money, I think that was almost like the turning point when things started to go a bit rough with the kiosk, and also you had some personal issues as well.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through?
Yeah, we had grown, like I said, we had grown Kiosked also 100% every year. So by 2015, we actually we were the fastest growing company in Finland. Remember, Supercell was also here. So we got this reward for the fastest growing company in Finland, and we were doing something like 20 million, a little bit less than 20 million in revenues, and we got to 15 million. What happened then was that Google came out with this new technology, and actually more or less decided together with Facebook that they're going to take over the market. So in less than 12 months, we basically lost 50% of our revenues without losing a single client or customer. So this was kind of a really big inflection point for us, and we had to basically go back into the engineering room and redesign the technology, and that together with that we had to actually take down the number of employees, unfortunately, quite radically. From I think we were close to 100 back then. We had to do a couple of big layoff rounds. Actually, triggered what I have now is diabetes 1. So I had to leave the company. I had to take a year off then. Back then, that was 2016, and I didn't really recognize that I was ill until almost at the last minute. I had lost 20 kilos of weight. I had lost almost my eyesight, but I was still going strong. I was still, we'll fix this. Luckily, I had a really good co-founder who basically could jump on and take over the company after me. But it was a really tough ride. So I ended up in emergency room in hospital for a week, and then basically I had to stop working for a year in order to get back my health. And now I'm living with diabetes, but it's not the end of the world. It's you have to take care better. You learn that you have to take care better of yourself. So sleep well, eat well, and exercise well.
Are there any signals founders who are listening now could sort of pick up, that warning signs or some things that you could sort of catch it a bit earlier than before you're in the emergency room?
Yeah, don't do the same mistakes. So what I did was, I was like, back then I was traveling like I calculated I did just back and forth travel to Stockholm back in those days. I did twice a week back and forth to Stockholm, and from Stockholm then I travel everywhere around the world. So I spent more than 30% of my wakening time on the planes. I was sleeping 2-3 hours a day, having small kids, or not small kids, they were already teenagers back then, but sleeping 2-3 hours a night, and basically don't do that. It will come back and hit you. So it was somehow it became a game for me to survive, and that game ended up taking me to hospital. I started to rapidly lose weight in 2016, like 0.5 kilo per day. Like I said, I lost my eyesight. I started to lose skin on my bones, like big chunks of skin on my bones. I started to drink water, and somehow, at that point in time, your body, it's just in a survival mode. You don't think. And until, in the last minute, I had a good friend who actually recommended me to go to hospital and do a check. And when they did blood screening in hospital, my blood sugar was above 100, so they couldn't even measure it anymore. And so they just, the only thing they did was they kind of put me into the emergency room, and I stayed there for almost a week. Luckily, they told me that later, that was a Saturday evening, they told me I wouldn't have woken up anymore on Monday morning. I was in that bad shape.
So how do you work? How is your work-life balance nowadays? What have you learned?
Yeah, do you really learn ever? I still do a lot of work, but I try to sleep 8 hours a day, 7-8 hours a day. I eat very healthy. I'm not exercising as much as I used to do, which I should be doing. But luckily we have something called winter coming up here, and I love skiing. So in a couple of months, I will be skiing every day. But it taught me the importance of taking care of yourself, because there's nobody else to take care of yourself. You can take care of employees, you can take care of the companies. You have this kind of, as a founder, you have this kind of for you it's important to make sure that everybody is feeling well. But you need to take care of yourself first, because otherwise it's not going to fly. For me, it was like almost fatal, unfortunately.
Let's have something fun as a next one, or at least something cool, which I think is cool. Maybe some of the audience as well. Candela. What is it? How did you get involved, and how is it disrupting the world?
Yeah, so Candela is actually, I got 2014, a friend of mine contacted me and said he has this great idea. He had read the comic books in Sweden, and he had seen this great thing that you can build these flying boats, and and actually some of them were already built already in the late 19th century. So we started to kind of look around, are there any, is this possible? And then I promised to help him to set up the company. So Gustav Hasselskog, the founder, is actually the inventor, and I don't want to take any credit, but it was a fun journey. So for the first 2 years, I'll help him to set up the company. I helped him to create the kind of the vision. I helped him with go-to-market. I think actually I was very involved in the sales. So the first 20 boats we sold, I was personally doing myself. But he was actually doing the designs, and it was a big struggle for them back then, 2014 and 2016, getting the algorithms right, getting the balance of the boat right, everything. But when you look at it now, I think it's the world's largest today a electric speedboat. And they're doing extremely well now. They are actually, they've gotten really good investors. I know that what's public is that Chris Anderson has invested there a lot of money. And now, for example, that Stockholm City is testing out their new transport. They're actually starting to do much more water transportation with Candela. So Candela is turning from being a speedboat to being a much more broader offering. And it's working really well. The only problem is the price point. It's unfortunately a little bit too high for me. But it was a fun ride to basically build that company from scratch with Gustav, and seeing it fly. And then 2016, what we did was when I was sick, I couldn't do it. I was basically, I stopped doing any work. 2016, we had to find a new chairman. And we had a former boss called Hansa Linder, who stepped up and took over the chairmanship, and I left them back then.
Do you still remember you said that you were involved with the first 20 sales? What was the sales pitch? How do you sell? Who are the first buyers for something which hasn't been done before? And what was the pitch?
It was great. It was typically, the first customer, we couldn't even believe that it was the first customer. We got an email one night that was, claimed to be the CTO of Microsoft, who had seen somewhere here on the net, he had seen, something about Candela and said he wants one. So we had to check that he actually was the CTO of Microsoft. So it was like these very enthusiastic engineers who saw that this is a revolutionary thing. We also had a very, very famous entrepreneur in Finland, serial entrepreneur in Finland, who said, I'm going to buy your boat. I'm going to pay double price. I don't want the boat. I want to see that this happens. I just want to make one ride with the boat, and then that's fine for me. So well, there are these kind of people and fantastic people. I don't want to name them, but they are, fantastic. So most of them were really pioneers and tech. Many of them were like tech entrepreneurs that had done well and wanted to see this fly. So it was exciting sales. It wasn't, in a way, it was an easy sale because they didn't have. They had the money. It was just, they thought this was a really cool thing. So it was an easy sell. Then came all the troubles, and luckily I had other things to do then. But right now, I think they're doing really well.
You started early. You were 17 years old, and for some reason you started a company. What's the story there? You didn't find anything else to do, or you were bored, or school was too boring, or why did you start as an entrepreneur?
Yes, I actually jumped off school 3 times, so but that's a separate story. I got so excited about Apple IIe back in the 1980s, and I started to do some.
What is Apple IIe for those people who are not so familiar?
It was their kind of it was the last model they had with those no, not those brand, but it was the last model they had before coming out with Lisa and Mac. What is called this Mac Plus Macintosh computer. So I got excited about that. I had some other early experiences from Spectrum, ZX, and those kind of VIC-20, those computers back then. And so I got excited about Apple and started to follow them. And then actually when the Macintosh came out, was 1984. I couldn't afford one, of course, but I actually back then in 1985 I got the dealership rights for Apple from basically for the whole south of Finland. Being 17.
Sorry, this just sounds so crazy. So you cannot afford one computer, but you just got for the dealership rights for the half of Finland.
Yeah. But it was super nice. It was, and back then, we had this PageMaker, Quark Express. So everything was about desktop publishing, right? And then there was FileMaker and HyperCard. So there was some software there, but I always felt that business is what I like. And back then I had, as a 17-year-old, I had enrolled at the business school in Finland. And so I started to look, okay, what can I do here? I have the dealership, maybe. So what I do is I started to sell to students in school, Macintoshes. And they had these special deals, special price for students. So I started to make some money on that one. I set up a shop called Data Age. And then we started to see, okay, what else can we do? Is there any business software? And since there is FileMaker and PageMaker, why isn't there Business Maker? So we found this great developer in Sweden that had failed once trying to create the bookkeeping software for Macintosh. And together we set up a business called, initially was called Business Maker. Then it became Nordic Business Solutions. Then it grew. It became HansaWorld, and so forth and so forth. And today, I think they have about 1 million enterprises using their software. They're still going strong. And we were 3 founders: myself, my co-founder in Finland, and the developer. And he now, I think, owns most of the shares in the company. And they are doing really well as well. But it was a fun ride. It was a fun ride being part of this journey from the beginning.
So why did you stop being involved with the company? Was it you needed to do the military service, or you wanted to do the school as well? Or?
Right. So I had 3 times already quit business school as well. So I felt that it was too boring when you were doing your own business, and they didn't have any experience or anything like that. It's not like nowadays the business schools are really good. Back then we didn't have any. It was just tests. It was just you just had to read and go to test, nothing more. So we have this thing called military service in Finland. You have to do 1 year. I hadn't done that, so I still had to do that. I was 24. I haven't finished my business school, so I had no academic exam. So in 1993, 94, I decided I need to kind of get something at least, so something on paper. So I sold off my shares in the company way too early. Back then we had just launched our client server solution. We just had launched our Windows version, and the company was like going like this. So in hindsight, I should never have sold. The company has been profitable from day one, so they're still going strong and profitable. But I ended up doing my military service 1 year in Finland, and then taking my exam from the business school, and then going forward to I wanted to try a corporate job. So I moved to Sweden and was recruited by the Wallenberg family, which is very much like the Rockefeller family in the US. And they had this really exciting, I wouldn't say incubator, but basically they had they had 2 holding companies. One was a strategic holding company called Investor, which is huge today. It's basically controlling more than 1/3 of the Nordic ecosystem. And then they had this company called Incentive, which had all these small exciting companies, medtech companies, industrial companies. Ericsson was part of that portfolio. ASEA was part of that portfolio. So they wanted to kind of divest that portfolio, and it was the biggest divestiture in Sweden back then. So they were looking for people who could actually do the groundwork and then work with these companies hands-on. So I felt that was for an entrepreneur, that was a pretty nice job to see a 150-year-old family business on the other side. And so it was fantastic time. 6 years, just being able to, suck in all the competence that they have gathered for 150 years. Fantastic people, really knowledgeable people. But then, 2000, my friends started, or 99, my friends started HotZip. So I ended up jumping over there, and everybody told me that I was crazy. You had a secure job, you had a good pay, you had all these, you had lots of secretaries, you were traveling around the world, you had your future lined up. But, startup world is where I belong.
So, do you still remember when you were thinking about jumping off from that wonderful job? What was the reasoning behind it? Because this was also, was it April 2000 when you actually did the final jump?
Yeah.
And for those who actually listened to a few episodes back, there's a Henry Nylert talking about when the market was crashing. Was it lastminute.com was the final IPO, which didn't go well. And this is exactly the same time you decided that now is the best time to go for the startup world.
It was they had been, we had been playing indoor hockey twice a week together with all those famous Swedish entrepreneurs, and everybody all the time asking me, okay, when do you jump off? When do you jump off? They told me about all these fantastic Let's Buy It and Information Highway exits that they've done and IPOs that they did back then, 1999, 2000. So finally I gave up and said, okay, let's try it. They had just raised a fund, $90 million fund, and they had invested in 30-something companies. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a try. I had an offer on the table to become, CTO, one of the largest companies today. CFO, sorry, of one of the largest companies of today in the Swedish companies. But I said, oh no, why don't I give it a try? And actually, it was on the 20th of April, 2000, and that was when the dot-com crash happened. So it was the same day I left and joined them. That was the peak of Nasdaq back then. So I ended up actually, my only job was to clean it up. So I ended up actually going from country to country, closing down their offices because they were burning huge amount of money. It was like heydays of the dot-com, and they were like, they had private apartments all over the world. They had cars, they had everything. So they're just burning cash. So I ended up cleaning up all of that and traveling around the world and closing down 11 offices and basically firing all the people. And the only thing was left was a handful of companies, and then just closing all these companies as well. So it was like a 12 month of just a closing down everything, unfortunately. And I've actually also lost tons of money on that one. I think I was the third largest private investor in that company, in that fund. So I lost all that money as well. So it was another ride to remember when you're a little bit older.
Are there any stories or experiences or lessons with that period when you were with the corporate? Because it's an exceptional company, it's an exceptional family, and what I understand that they also quite hands-on doing stuff and understanding. So it's not just looking the profit and losses and calculating the dividends. It's actually also running the companies and being there involved with the actual operational side. So are there anything you want to share with the
there was a lot of things I learned, but one of the things that they always said, and they kind of they were very kind of down to earth. They are a fantastic family, take care of each other. The values are really important. One of the things that they always said was, I always remember two things. Micke, you can't, you can fight gravity, but you can't beat it. That was one of the things they said. So, make your calls quick. And the other thing was, they kind of, they were a little bit reluctant to consultants. They always, the saying was that it's really easy to make things complicated. That's why we have consultants. Really easy to make easy things complicated, but it's really difficult to make difficult things easy. That's why we have us. And that was like, for them it was simplicity was really important. For example, when we had factories in more than 60 countries. We had logistics centers in more than 70 countries. But these guys, they knew that they were just focusing on one or two KPIs constantly. So for example, a production capacity. I remember my boss was like, the only number he wants to see is the production capacity utilization rate. If it was above 72%, he knew that they were making losses. If it was below, he knew that they were making losses because they had more people that they needed, or if it was above, they needed to go do a couple of more shifts, which made them unprofitable. So he had this kind of a feeling, he had this understanding of the dynamics of a business that I haven't seen anybody have, later on. And he was also he was really good in the numbers. He could spot, sometimes he gave me Excel sheets and said, Micke, tell me what's wrong here. And he had the capability of actually digesting big amount of numbers just by glancing at them very quickly. And since I have an interest and a background as a mathematician as well, it actually became one of my big passions. So it was really funny. We did some really nice, what do you call it? Not perks, what do we call it? Jokes for the board as well back then. Sometimes we just swapped the numbers and we just made some crazy summarizing. and they were just happy looking at those numbers, and they didn't see those things. So it was like, okay, but it was fantastic. I had a fantastic boss back then.
So, what are the KPIs you now closely following with the startup investments and in your own companies? Do you have that similar kind of
cash flow? Yeah, you can do growth, but if you don't have the cash flow in order, it doesn't matter. So it's all about the cash flow, making sure that you have control of your cash flow. And that's also, when it comes to financing, that's the cheapest way of financing as well. The more you can get from your customers in advance, the cheaper your financing cost is. The most expensive capital is, of course, not debt, but venture capital. Because there you are not only paying interest rate, you're giving away control. And control is for an entrepreneur is really important. But we can see now in the last few years that actually venture capitalists have started to understand that. And also entrepreneurs have started to understand that. That's why we're seeing so much new debt instruments coming out on the market. And EIB is also introducing new debt instruments all the time. So, these debt instruments, they can fuel also entrepreneurship, the whole kind of the entrepreneurs' drive, because you don't need to give away all that control that we had to give.
You've been building something the last 2 years as well, and what I heard that you actually used design thinking approach there as well, knocking on doors of was it 100 different contractors and in the target market customers, and asking what's wrong and how do you do stuff. Can you explain how do you started to approach, because you knew that there's an issue firsthand, there's a problem in industry, and there's like how did you, what were the steps that, okay, we have an issue here, Houston, there's problem, and then now this week you just mentioned that actually as of today it's now filed in the product, at least the MVP product is in the Apple Store and Google Store finalization processes, so they are coming up live pretty soon. So what was the first step, and how do you walk through? And I think this happened in the last 2 years now.
Yeah, this is the kind of, once again, when you say never again and you do it again. So 2017, when I when I cured and I found a new balance in life, I actually started to see what's my big passion in life, and that's old buildings, old wooden buildings. So I have this old wooden building from the early 20th century, 1910. It's built by a famous architect called Elias Saarinen. And I started to renovate it, and I had some really bad experiences, both from a customer experience, but also from a kind of a professional experience. It's really hard to find people who know how to handle these old houses. So I said, okay, this is interesting, because around me here where I live, it's a lake here, just outside of Helsinki. There's like 20 of those buildings. And if I can't find anyone who can fix them, the other ones can't either find. So I decided, there's an opportunity here. So I set up a company called Trähus, which is a wooden house called, and started to gather those people and find those people. But once again, going into a new category or new segment, you don't know anything about. It's always a challenge. So the first 3 years we were really, doing 500,000, 1 million losses every year, trying to find the right people. Construction is not famous for being customer centric, and we really needed to. We pivoted a couple of times, and it wasn't until like 18 months ago that we found a secret sauce on how to basically build this business. So now we have 40 people. We're not looking for more people. We have a solid, good, profitable business. We have 2 legs to stand on. We are both renovating old houses, everything from the 15th century until today. And then we are also we have a carpenter shops, 2 carpenter shops that actually where we do everything from windows to furniture to kitchens. We do a lot of kitchens for people, without all these plastics and all these glues and all this kind of stuff. It's beautiful, beautiful, like Danish design kitchens by hand. Everything is done by hand. But when we did this pivot, we also recognized that there is no real digital tools out there. I mean, if you look at a typical construction company, they use 10 to 15 different tools. So everything from basic like WhatsApp or Slack to Trello for project management. Then they use like Congrid, or they use Excel for calculations. Then they use, so normally they're using between 10 to 15 different SaaS software for doing all the stuff that can be done in one application. So what we did was, initially we thought that, okay, this is interesting. This is a B2B opportunity as well. But we saw that there's so many dinosaurs out there, so many big B2B platforms out there. So we ended pivoting into the B2C software and actually, launched the first application with all these features that you now basically are buying from 10 different sources. You can get in one application. Time tracking is embedded, included. Forecasting is embedded, included. Reporting is embedded, included. Everything is mobile. So basically now you can actually do all the things that you used 10 different software to do, you can do in one solution. And that's what we just launched. And we're slowly growing it now. We know that the market is huge. There's nothing similar. We know that the market opportunity is big. And so we're taking country by country right now.
What is your favorite word?
Yeah. I think, my favorite word is like, I would say, let's do it. If you have a problem, I mean, there's nothing, for an entrepreneur, it's like, there's no obstacles. So let's just roll up our sleeves and do it. If we have a problem, let's fix it. Long answer to a short question.
What is your least favorite word?
This is the one that I always get when somebody, when you have corporate people involved, you get this, nobody told me. Nobody told me that. Okay. Couldn't you figure out yourself? No, but nobody said to me that to do that. That annoys me a lot.
What turns you on creatively? What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Developing new things. It is so fun to see solving problems and seeing things develop, both things and people. It actually is, seeing people grow and develop. That's makes me feel really good.
What turns you off?
It's easy to say one word: betrayal. And for me, having worked with the Wallenberg family, that was the key thing. You're honest, you're open, you're honest. You don't betray anyone. We are all in the same boat. So betrayal is a kind of that's a no-go.
What is your favorite curse word?
I don't use curse words. I like to listen. There's a famous Swedish musician, Thomas Thåström, who sings fan, fan, fan. It's like shit, shit, shit almost. But that's not curse word I use. But that's the kind of music I listen to when I'm really pissed off. And then just go ahead again.
What sound or noise do you love?
I'm brought out in the Finnish archipelago. It's beautiful. For those who haven't seen it, it's fantastic. All the different throughout the year, how it changes, and the sound of birds, the sound of water, it's fantastic. That kind of that's my inner peace. And the Finnish archipelago, everybody should experience it. In Kiosked, we used to have this archipelago race once a year we took all people out in the Finnish archipelago to experience it, and they were all amazed every time.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I have 4 kids, and with 4 kids, everything happens. But every now and a while, you hear something breaking, and that's what's happened now. And and that's that sound of breaking. That's okay, not again. What happened now?
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I've also always admired lawyers. I've always admired, because I'm a mathematician, everything is so logical, and so is law, very logical. So if I would choose a new profession, I would actually probably be a lawyer, because right now I'm always writing my own agreements or company agreements as well, most of them. So I think I'm started to become pretty good at doing that. So, and negotiating agreements. So I think a lawyer would be very natural for me.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh, that's easy. That's a corporate job. Doing something where somebody is just telling you what to do constantly and having opinions. No. I mean, come on.
Hey, but you could say, I didn't know. Nobody
told me. Doing a corporate job, that's no, I'm not going to do that.
If you could be a co-founder of any startup in any era, which one would you choose?
Apple. I was back then intrigued by, I had my first design company actually when I was 16, 17. We were designing business cards back then with the Apple computer. And this combination of computing and design is something that's always fascinated me. And it's the beauty, it's the kind of it's so much, it's the peacefulness, it's the kind of being able to relax your eye on something that is really well done. Is that intrigues me. So I would definitely say design and computing.
Any final words to the audience?
Remember, I don't know what I should say final words, but I would say this is that we entrepreneurs, we are a special breed in a way. We always help each other. And remember to ask for advice. If you want to become an entrepreneur, or if you are an entrepreneur, if you have a business already running, don't be afraid of asking for advice. It's like, it's part of the whole kind of the community that we help each other. And I think giving back is really a powerful thing. So I think we entrepreneurs, we need to give back. We need to work more on helping others to become successful. That's the only way we can bring things forward. So giving back is something, don't be afraid of asking, but don't be afraid of giving back. It will always, it will always come back. Hope I can...
Thank you, Micke.
Sorry. Hope I can help somebody.
Yeah, I guess there was so many lessons even in this hour we had, so I'm sure somebody already got some ideas from what you said today. And thank you, audience, as well, for joining us today. And till next time.